Welcome. I'm Martin Stuchtey. I'm with Innsbruck University. I'm the founder of the Land Banking Group and of Systemic. Welcome to Rethinking Natural Capital. And welcome to a 419 ppn world. Welcome to 2023, the year of a super El Nino, the year with runaway temperatures, particularly in the northern Atlantic, mean surface water temperatures that leave scientists puzzled and arguing to what extent we should actually accept that we will run post 2030 into an overshoot, or whether we should hold on to the idea that this is an avoidable future. And also welcome to a world where it seems the cohesion, the multilateral cohesion that we need for climate and for nature action is fading, at least weakening, and where we see a rebound of fossil fuels, and where it seems harder and harder to convince societies actually to bear the cost for a climate transition. In such a context, we are asking ourselves whether there is a one-shot solution, something that is faster, more effective and more equitable than all the political programs that we see right now. One solution that we have extensively discussed is that we have to move from a world where we ignore the costs we create to nature to one where we pay for those costs. Again, which is hard to accommodate in a world of high costs of living. There might be a second and potentially complementary approach where we actually turn investments into nature as something that is deemed attractive and feasible. What if everyone had a natural capital account? Everyone. We as countries, we as companies, we as individuals. Natural capital, oceans, terrestrial ecosystems, the atmosphere. What of those natural capital accounts were actually accepted as a collateral for assets, for potentially equitable securities, for currencies? What if sometime in the future we had a Bretton Woods 2.0 with nature-backed currencies? In order to get us into such a future, we need two things. First, we need to have infrastructure, informational and financial infrastructure that allows us to onboard, to assess, to register, then to transact and to hold and to settle these kinds of nature capital derived assets. I am in the exciting world where scientists, startups, institutions are trying to build this infrastructure, and we are trying to contribute to that. The second thing that we would need is a world in which those assets, nature capital, is actually deemed valuable. And the good news is, increasingly it is. We might already be in a world where nature capital is the ultimate collateral. Let me make 5 points. My first point is we are growing poor as societies and as companies, and the reason is the degradation of nature capital. My second point is nature is degrading because we are not reinvesting. My third point is we are not investing because we haven't found ways to make nature funding a balance sheet grade asset. My fourth point is that in order to have such an asset, we need infrastructure. And my last point is, with that infrastructure, we could actually have a collateral that serves for asset issuance, for security issuance, and ultimately for currencies. Now, my first point is this. We are growing poor. All the way until the mid-80s, we have seen a world in which all the macro indicators of the economy were growing in sync. That is labor productivity, that is economic growth, that is employment, median family income, but also any reasonable measure for societal progress. Now, ever since the mid-80s, we've seen a great divergence. And that divergence has opened two dynamic gaps. One is between the increase in labor productivity and our median incomes. That's the equity gap. The second one is between economic growth and our wealth that we have as societies, which includes nature. and that is the nature gap. And so we have a nature gap and we have an equity gap to close. And not only are we growing poor as societies, we are also growing insolvent as companies. If you take 96 out of 100 resource extracting companies, and if you were charging them the full cost of their resource extraction, the natural capital degradation, they in fact would be out of the money, they would be insolvent, they would be loss-making. Now, that is a completely new world, and it is due to the massive degradation that we see in biological systems, in resource systems, and in climate systems. All of these are off the charts. In resource systems, we live in a world where very soon we will have 1 kilogram of plastic on 1 kilogram of fish in the oceans. In biological systems, we live in a world where only 3% of the vertebrates that live on this planet are actually wild animals. And when it comes to climate, we live in a world where we actually have reached a corridor which we haven't transgressed over the last 2 million years. Now, all of this is different in order of magnitude, but it's also different in character. It's systemic because a new forest is not an old forest. It's exponential. We know more accelerators than we know buffers. And it is irreversible because biodiversity gone is biodiversity gone. So we are degrading natural capital at an unprecedented rate. And the reason for that is how we are treating nature in our market economy. We currently have a nature market where you can make a killing out of destroying it. We need a nature market where you can be rewarded for protecting and restoring it. That's not where we are. We need to have a nature market where it's worthwhile to reinvest into nature as critical infrastructure, as we do in any other infrastructure. We currently have a funding gap, an investment gap into nature, which is well above 700 billion every year. And if we were investing that, maintenance investment for healthy ecosystems, expansion investments for healthy ecosystems, then we would in fact get very high rewards. There's about value that nature creates to us, and you can always argue about these numbers, of 56 trillion a year. How is that as an IRR? And also to companies, the return would be very high. The World Economic Forum says that nature in 2030 will be by far the biggest risk to businesses. And even now we feel it. There are supply chains breaking down. No oranges from the Mediterranean, no barley or hop for the brewery industry. No insurances anymore, home insurances in California because of the excessive wildfire risks. There's an incentive even now to reinvest into the health of ecosystems. My third point is this. We need to treat nature as critical infrastructure and invest into it. Wouldn't we invest into any other infrastructure category, be it transportation, be it energy, be it social infrastructure? Every single time we do it publicly, we do it privately. We don't do it in nature, which arguably is our most critical infrastructure, because this is how vital functions are delivered for the avoidance of droughts, of floods, of pests, of zoonotic events, of fires. And still we don't. In order to invest, we need to look at nature as something that actually is an asset, a balance sheet asset. And here we learn from the chartered accountant profession that an asset needs to be something that is controllable, that is identifiable, and that is economically useful. And we believe that this is actually something that can be warranted. However, it requires a new way to deal with nature and to handle nature capital. So my fourth point is this. There are ways to build a financial and informational infrastructure, a market infrastructure that actually makes nature capital investable. in order to do that, we need to ascertain its value. We secondly need to be able to issue contracts that have asset grade. And thirdly, we need to allow all market actors to trade these assets in a way that is trusted and equitable. And we think all of that is doable by bringing three innovations together. The first one we call structured MRV. MRV, that stands for measurement, reporting and verification. Our ability to assess nature with regards to its nature capital parameters, that is soil health, that is carbon storage, that is water holding capacity, that is particularly biodiversity, richness, rarity, habitat diversity, ecosystem integrity, biocomplexity. Now, that we need to do, and in order for the MRV to be structured, it has to be comprehensive. We need to be able to do it across different biomes, ecosystem archetypes. We secondly have to be able to make it predictive. For that we need machine learning models. And thirdly, we have to make sure that it is verifiable so that we can trust it, validatable. The second thing that we need is the ability then to give every piece of land, every pixel of the planet, a biophysical nature capital account that tells us something about how ecosystem health evolves over time. Because that is then the underlying that we need for the issuance of contracts. We call it nature service agreements between those who provide nature capital and those who want to invest into it. And those who want to invest into it are insetters who have value chain exposure, offsetters, insurers, investors. Now, and finally, we need to create a place where you can actually hold, manage, transact, and settle these nature agreements. These three things together are the infrastructure that we need for equitable nature markets to work. My fifth point is this. With that infrastructure, we could create an underlying, which we call nature equity, which could back up assets, it could back up equitable securities, and eventually it could back up currencies. We see a way into that world which moves from balance sheet grade bilateral nature service agreements between a provider of nature capital, a land steward, and an investor in nature capital, be it an insurance, an institutional investor, be it an insetter, an offsetter. Now, once we have created balance sheet grade bilateral contracts based on nature equity as an underlying, we might bring in financial intermediaries who work with high fiduciary duties. And later on, we might even bring in more capital from capital markets by creating special purpose vehicles to fund millions and millions of nature service agreements that exist between providers and investors into nature capital. Now, I don't think that is the end of the journey. Nature equity as an underlying could eventually back up currencies. What are currencies? We made them up. They're a convention. Having them backed up by gold is a convention. Having them backed up by dollar is a convention. Having them backed up by nature equity would be an invention. We would have to convince ourselves that we trust the measurement. Is it a hard currency? And we would have to convince ourselves that they have intrinsic value. And what if not nature, with its vital functions for society, has intrinsic value? And we would have to believe that we as an economy increasingly accept it as a currency, a fiscal currency, a private market currency, a capital market currency, a currency to buy licenses. Now, all of that is something that we as society can decide. Whether we will do that, I don't know. That's the sufficient condition. The necessary condition is that we have the infrastructure for the creation of nature equity in place. And that's what we, together with a large community of scientists, startups, are in the middle of. It's our best hope to give ourselves the notion that nature, healthy ecosystems, our true value and help us to drive towards the world we want, which is climate positive, which is nature positive, and which is equitable. Thank you.